Okay, so we're going to continue today and we're going to be talking about more programming structures that make use of logical expressions, Boolean values, so to say. So when we're evaluating these conditional kinds of statements like the if statement, the if else statement, um, we're really looking at Boolean expressions essentially because we're looking at evaluating whether or not a condition is true or false and then performing some sort of task based upon that Boolean value. So we have the most basic programming statement here we could have, which is if condition, and then some sequence of statements. So notice that syntactically, this is really close to what we've been seeing all along in Python. Our condition, of course, needs to be some sort of comparison operator or other kind of test that will result in a Boolean value, of course. Remember our discussion about Python, how values that are zero or non-zero also can be interpreted as Boolean. We'll talk about that more later. Um, then that condition is followed by a colon, and then we get our sequence of statements, and that completes the programming statement that we make use of here. So if we need to do something a little bit more complex, however, we have an if-else statement. And this goes much the same way, except we add an else here, colon. Don't forget the colon. I was good at doing that for a while because I um, was thinking more like R, and I still do that, and I'll probably do that in class. Um, and our new sequence of statements. We can have multiple conditions or sequences of statements that follow multiple conditions, I should say. And so we're going to figure out how to handle that in just a moment. But these are the two most basic ways that we can do it here. It's if it's true, you do it this sequence, false, you do these statements. Okay, so let's test ourselves here. It's kind of a funny looking programming statement, isn't it? I'll talk about why it's set up this way, kind of some of the reasoning behind it, but we have X assigned a value of 5, and then we have an if else. Take a moment, make a prediction about what you think. This one's easy enough. I'm just going to let you make your prediction, then we'll see if you're right on the notes. Okay, so if X is 5, then clearly X is bigger than 2. So we're going to move into this sequence of statements. It's going to run through the entire sequence of statements. So first it'll assign a value of -3 to X, and then it'll assign a value of 1. So we'll get back 1. It will not go to this programming sequence of statements because of the fact that X is bigger than 2. Okay, now why are we making 2 assignments to X here and here? Well, just to really point out the fact that we run through all programming statements within that sequence that's contained between the original if declaration and then the else condition there. So just be aware that it's going to run through everything. You can't, for example, insert new programming statements that should be functionally independent of this programming structure and then expect it not to be included as part of the conditional sequence of statements contained within your if structure. Okay, so just be wary and aware of that. There's not, the thing I like about R is you encapsulate all of your sequence of statements within the curly brackets. So it's very clear that they belong to and only to that if statement or the else statement. There's no question here. I could see things getting a little wonky, perhaps. Okay, so what if we have multiple ifs? I could see this if, for example, you have 5 different positions at your organization that all get different salaries, and you'd like to say if they are an engineer, they get this salary. If they're analysts, they get this salary. If they are a administrator, they get the biggest salary, so on and so forth. Okay, so this is how we would handle it within Python. You can, just like the other two that we just looked at, you can think of this as one big statement. It's going to evaluate from beginning to end, top to bottom. When it finds this is important, so take a moment, concentrate. If you're doing something else, listen. When it finds a condition is true, it executes the corresponding indented statements and continues after this code. That's really important. I'll state it again. It executes the corresponding indented statements and continues after this code. So this might allow for multi-level conditional statements such as, I am an engineer. Well, are you an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer? That's an important thing. I don't think we're going to see any multi-level conditional statements like that in these notes. I don't recall that, but it could happen. The else that ends this is optional. You don't have to have it. You could just have a lot of elif, for lack of a better word. That's else if, obviously. Statements and end with that. That's fine. But if it's there, it executes all the condition only if all the conditions above it are false. So we'll only get to that sequence of statements, the nth one right there, if everything previous is false. Got it? So let's evaluate. Imagine temperature is a value in Fahrenheit or Celsius. That, I guess Celsius would make more sense here, that is recorded above, okay? So if the temperature is bigger than 0, so there's our first condition, logical test, we're going to print above freezing. Else, if the temperature is 0, it is exactly freezing. Else, notice that's not else if, print below freezing. So it's really, we've got 3 options here. We're above 0, we're equal to 0, or we're below 0, right? Does the code do exactly the same thing? I'm moving my screen. I just realized I cut off my notes. Does it do the same thing as what's above? Again, assume temperature is some numeric value. Like you can put a real number in your head, like -20, something like that. Okay, well, what's the difference? Well, notice instead of having the concluding else statement, we have an else if again. Would it be the same? Make a prediction? I think it would. If you're unsure, test it out. Type this out. Remember how when you're learning programming, I really encourage you to learn it the hard way. Like we talked about, typing this out, you'll get more used to the syntax this way, and it'll become more automatic to you. Just looking at it, for me at least, does not do the same. So you really need to spend that time. What's it going to take? 30 seconds to type out. So just go ahead and do it. Okay, another concept test, kind of related. We have the same code at the top, but does this code do exactly the same thing? Well, what's different here? Instead of it being an else if or an else statement that gives below freezing, we have a print statement. So would that work? Sorry, I should have closed my email. Take a moment. I want to point out something to you here. If you ran this, how many times would you see below freezing? Your answer should be all the time. Even if you put in, say, the temperature is 20, you're going to get above freezing printed, right? But you get to the end of this, here's the end of your conditional statements that belong to this else if expression, and this is just a programming statement. So it'll say above freezing, below freezing. Type that out and make sure that's right. By the way, I would put a space here. Maybe that's a little hard to see, but remember we indent, and the indentation is actually